Scooby-Doo. So yeah. Hey everybody, welcome back. I'm Emily Moyer. Danny Katz is coming to you live from the portal that she swam through. This is episode number 63 of Words. Good afternoon. It's Wednesday afternoon.
It's Wednesday afternoon. So happy to be sharing it with you. What are you drinking?
This is Waterloo watermelon sparkling water. We're having a very strange summer sparkling water wise that has forced us to branch out into territories that I wouldn't normally branch out into. So there's a Topo Chico shortage again. This is a problem. This is the only part of the food supply, the supply chain food shortage thing that like I'm super upset about in any way. This is the second summer in a row there's a Topo Chico shortage. There's like, I think that they're keeping it mysterious for like the, you know, kind of like keeping the line outside of the club to build up the mystique, even though there's actually no one inside the club kind of thing. Yeah. Last summer, they said there was a glass shortage, right? I think what's really happening is that it only seems to happen in the summer or like in the late spring leading up to summer, that once they got bought by Coca-Cola, then their distribution capabilities were much farther. It used to just mostly be in the Southwestern United States. And what happens is that like nobody in places where there's snow want Topo Chico the rest of the year, but once it starts to get hot, they do. So suddenly the entire country wants Topo Chico. And, you know, and so I think that's part of it. And then this, you know, issue with the glass, I don't know. There seems to be shortage on other kinds of sparkling water too, not as intense, but there's no shortage of the sparkling waters that come in cans, which I don't really like. I prefer to drink out of glass, but that has not really been an option many times. Yeah. And so we have been experimenting with these Waterloo brand, like the flavors. I don't normally like flavored sparkling water, but they capture this like the grape one tastes exactly like grape soda, from, but not sweet. It's not sweet. So it just has like that reminder of like being little.
I hate grape flavored any.
Right.
I don't like grape flavor.
I like it. I don't like it when it's sweet, right? I don't like the sweet stuff, but like
I don't like fruit flavored things because it never tastes like the actual fruit.
So this one, like some of them do, and the ones that don't, it's because it tastes like the version that worked better for soda back in the beginning anyway, like the grape. Like grape soda does not taste like grapes.
Were you guys members of the Pop Shop in LA back in the day?
No.
The Pop Shop was this place where you would get glass bottles and it was all different flavors of pop, like all the cherry, grape, orange, root beer, whatever. And then when you were done, you'd bring them back and they'd refill them. And they had like the Pop Shop tops to like keep the carbonation.
Yeah, no, it sounds wonderful. We weren't part of that. But so anyway, since we've been forced into the can, we've been experimenting. I'm not really for flavored sparkling water either. I think there's probably got to be something in there that's not what they're listing it as that is awful.
So apparently to use the phrase natural flavors, that can incorporate up to 80 different ingredients.
Yes, correct. That's what I'm talking about. But oftentimes there is no plane anymore. Like they're out of plane. Like this is like, they'll be like, everybody's worried about like the shelves being empty or there not being any meat or any eggs. That shit's all full and on sale. It's the sparkling water that is not available. Right. So we've been pushed into some corners that we wouldn't normally explore.
What about getting a soda stream that carbonates your water for you?
So I've thought about that before. Like my cousin has one, and someone I used to babysit for back in the day had that. It's not poppy enough for me. Like the Topo Chico makes you like addicted to the like super fizzy.
Yeah, the super sparkle.
I like, you know how I am. I like a lot of action. I like a lot of fizz, a lot of sparkle.
I feel like it's proportional to people who can do a lot of psychedelics. Cause like Ross, he'll like water down all of his sparkle beverages. And I'm like, no, like I want way more sparkles.
Yes, me too. So I feel the same way like about Now, I recognize that some people have issues digestion wise about this, and that's a little bit different, but I feel the same way for about people who don't like spicy food. I understand that some people like it, but their stomach can't really handle it. But people who don't like it, or like whatever, they hate it. Like, I'm like, there's something about being momentarily uncomfortable that you seem like you have an objection to. I don't know about that. Yeah, I don't want to trip with you either.
Also, like the fact that we don't have enough words for like pain or discomfort. I think it just adds like a kind of tactile, like embodied element to what would otherwise be just like a flavor profile situation. So for me, it makes it more
Correct.
of a synesthetic experience.
100%. Yeah. So Robert got me into like, Robert is really funny. He gets obsessed with like going down ridiculous, like YouTube, like rabbit holes, not conspiracy ones, but like he'll get into some animal thing or some, your kitty porn that you're into or whatever. I didn't know that about you. That was a wonderful revelation. But he got me.
I gave it up since I gave it up. The whole social media thing. I'm off of kitty porn.
Watching these chili pepper eating competitions, because there's this one woman, she lives in England, but she's an Indian woman, right? And since she started competing, she's never lost, right? But when you watch her, she's fucking shape-shifting as she's got all of this heat coming through her. Like sometimes she looks like, what's the fucking Hindu goddess with all the arms, and right? Sometimes she looks like that. Sometimes she looks like Shiva, the destroyer, whatever I don't know, the different, like you watch her. She even there's this one chili that does this, it's super hot. And sometimes it makes people's hands get stuck like this, and it's called having naga claw, right?
Oh, she'll just tetany. It's called tetany.
Right, whatever it is, she like, but watching her, it's like, oh my God, this is amazing. It's like, it's psychedelic, right? Like it's the same kind of thing. And I was sitting there like watching all afternoon at his barbecue, like everyone else is socializing. I'm like watching this woman shapeshift from spicy food. I'm like, this is fantastic, right?
That's so fun.
And she was like a very attractive woman, like very successful in business and finance. She just does this for fun. Like she always liked spicy food. Someone gave her a flyer for a chili eating competition. She did it. She got into she just thought I'll do it for fun. She got into it, and like, she was fucking, she's like, well, fuck, I'm doing it. I have to win, right? So she just kept doing it. And now she's never lost competition because she just has this need to win, right? She just like, once I'm in it, I'm going to win it, right? And awesome. It's incredible to watch all these like huge dudes just puss out, and she's just like, you know? So yeah. So anyway, but yeah, I like those. I like we don't have enough things in our daily life that like take us out of our normal state of being, in a way. Like sneezing is one of them, like orgasms or things like that. But spicy food, like unexpectedly poppy stuff or whatever. I like stuff like that. But some people, they just don't want, they want a homeostasis and they want it all the time. And I'm just not like that.
Totally. I mean, you can see it in all the levels. It's why you do what you do. It's why we know what we know. All this. Most people just want to be like comfortable, safe, secure, and we like spicy food.
We do. All right. So speaking of spicy food, let's give people the update. You have left Instagram and you've left Facebook, or just Instagram?
So I left both. Here's the way that I left them. Everything's still up on Instagram. And I still have my Facebook account. I'm still going to use Facebook for local shit. Like, can anyone come fix my something or ever? Because I think it's useful in that way. They're no longer getting content from me at all. I'm not looking at Instagram anymore. And our last show was really instrumental. I mean, everyone's heard about the issues that I've had with it. And I know you've heard me bitch about what was going on in Instagram. And I could hear in your voice when I was explaining to you, I have 8,500 followers. And when I bought an ad, 4 people saw it.
Right.
Legit 4 people. And I could hear, I was like, oh, I guess when people hear me bitching, they don't really understand the extent. And then you and I did our last show on the weaponization of customer service.
Right.
And someone weighed in and said, I refuse to do business with companies that don't have customer service. And I was like, yeah, I need to get on that. Like, this is so freaking out of integrity. And I did hire a new business coach to help me figure out how to restructure everything, because I'd become very dependent on Instagram as my primary marketing tool. So they get nothing from me. I'm no longer posting any content on Instagram. I'm not engaging with that app at all. I'm not posting anything on Facebook. They can all go fuck themselves. The way I'm doing it now is just my newsletter. Like that's the primary thing. And I'm still going to post stuff on locals and do it that way. But in terms of staying connected with my audience, I'm going old school because in all my research, email's the least fucked with. And that's where we still have the most like sovereignty and autonomy.
Yeah. I mean, I think like, you know, you've been saying this about the social media stuff for a long time, like even before it was really Facebook or Instagram, YouTube or this or that or whatever. And like, there was never a time where I was like, I think Danny's crazy. She's making this up, but my mind just doesn't think about that stuff. Right. So like when I post stuff, like, sure, I know, like we've all noticed that like, if I post my cat died, 8,500 people are so sorry and loving and commenting and giving me hugs. And if I post like something meaningful that I worked a lot of time on, 4 people will like it. And then, so like, I noticed that at a certain point, I realized, oh, if you post anything that links to any media, it gets less than if you don't. So that's why I started just like making one-liners and then putting the video down in the comments. And that seemed to help a little bit. But I'm just like, okay, well, I'm just not going to spend a lot of time on that, right? Like I've never invested the amount of time in trying to promote my stuff on Facebook or Instagram, certainly not Instagram. I open that app like once every 6 months. Like I don't care. So there's like, okay, like I can't be mad at them for like not making my business easy for me. I haven't put time into it. So just like, okay, well, whatever. And I just always assume, and maybe this isn't right. Like maybe like your explanation is closer to my truth as well, even though I don't think about it, is that like, there's probably not that many people that interested in what I have to say, right? Like, I just think that, so.
Right, yeah. I mean, for me, I never bought one follower, so I organically grew to 8,500 people. So at some point, every one of those people was interested enough to press the follow button. And up until, you know, I wrote the documentary that we're not going to name here because we want to protect our YouTube channels, I would get anywhere from like, you know, within the first, I'd say hour of posting, I would get anywhere from like 300 to 1,200 views. And then it would top out around like 3,000 to 4,000. And now, you know, up until last week, like I posted my pronoun pickle video, 20 views. Like that's not organic. That's not, and people were telling me that they were suppressing me. They couldn't find me. They were unfollowing people for me who weren't making that choice. And I'm just like, the loosh here that I'm given, like, just like it was driving me crazy. And I'm like, I'm choosing to be in an abusive relationship. My only choice.
Show what they did to you. Show them what Instagram did.
Instagram did to me. Instagram, guys. That's how abusive they are. Yeah. So I was just like, fuck it. I want out of this paradigm. And I keep leaning towards less and less digital. I'm not interested. You know, I hear these conversations of like, well, we're going to a digital currency. Is it going to be centralized or decentralized? And I'm like, I don't give a fuck. It's neither for me.
Like, I'm just like, no.
It's going to be a hard no. So yeah, this is just another step away. I feel so good. And also I just feel like I'm no longer connected to those entities and those demons that are definitely connected to that whole game.
Yeah, I've never really done Twitter or Instagram at all. And like, I've always taken Facebook with a grain of salt. Like YouTube has been more what I've done my stuff from. But, you know, I think one of the reasons that the email and the newsletter is good for you is like, you like to engage writing wise. You like email, you like writing articles and letters. Like I personally don't. So if I were to move to like having to do all of my communication through newsletter and email, like the communication would probably end pretty quickly. And if people didn't have telepathy, it would be over, right? So I think
we'll see how it goes. You know, this is early days. So yeah, people might say I'm not interested and fall away. We'll see.
Yeah, no, but you know, no, I think that's a good move. And like, I think that for it, the whole like social media entity, it's just like any other entity, whether like the religion entity or the IRS entity or the corporate entity. Like some people can just engage at like a distance that they're not too involved and it doesn't bother them and it doesn't start to become something that they're really wrapped up in, and others can't, right? And it's sometimes for a lot of people, it's better to be like, I'm not doing this at all, right? Like, and that's it. And I support that. Anybody who wants to do that, like, go for it, right? And I won't be sad if those platforms shrivel and die.
No, not at all. I've gotten a lot of support. Like, I did make an announcement on Instagram, like, hey, I'm leaving. This is my last post. And I would say 99% were like, good for you. That's awesome.
It would be hilarious if all of a sudden you got like 1,200 responses when you say,
dude, my goodbye video got like, I mean, I haven't been on for probably like 4 or 5 days since I left, but the last time I checked, it got like 500 views compared to my other like legit stuff, which gets like 20, of course. Yeah. But I also just think like, I don't want to keep turning my attention on some sort of consensus reality programming mechanism. And I'm kind of weirded out that I allowed myself to be in it for so long. So yeah, I'm out.
Awesome. Goodbye. Okay, so on to the next little tidbit. You had an interesting interaction at this word segment is going to be a couple little tidbits in the beginning, and then some analysis of a scenario, and then we'll move into like the meaty dinner over and afterwards. That will be a good one for everybody. But let's go to the next little bit, which was you had an encounter in your improv class this week.
I did. And I just want to say, this is just as meaty. I think this is relevant. This is something for all of us to dig into. So I have been taking improv in New Mexico since 2020. So this is my 4th class with this particular school. And most of the people in the class are like around my age, maybe a little bit more. Santa Fe tends to skew, you know, towards people who have more sunspins. Okay. So we had an uneven amount of people in class. So our very last exercise at the end of class, there was one woman left over who hadn't gone, and I jumped up to do the exercise with her, even though I'd already done it. And she is young. She's in her 20s. And I really do my best to not stereotype people. I actually take it to the extreme where someone looks like a stereotype. I give them the benefit of the doubt and assume that they're the polar opposite because I don't want to play into it. So she's a young girl with dyed magenta hair and like hipster glasses and everything that you would frickin' imagine. And I've really enjoyed playing with her in the classes that we had. So the prompt we were given was, you are bodybuilders making smoothies. So we're doing the bodybuilder thing, and she mentions taking a ballet for bodybuilders class. And I said, ballet's so faggy. And she fucking flipped. And she goes, what did you just say? And I said, and I'm still in character, right? And I'm like,
she broke character, right? She broke character.
She broke character, but I was doing my best to stay in character. So I was like, I said faggy. And I said, oh, I'm sorry. I know you're sensitive. I mean gay-y. That wasn't any better. So she pulls me aside after class, and she is literally like crawling out of her skin. So upset.
You hold on 1 second. Did she continue with the scene? Did she get back in character, or what happened?
Kind of, but she was like thrown. She was like, what did you just say? And I'm like, faggy. And she like tried, but she was thrown. So she comes up to me after class. She's shaking like uncontrollably. She's on the verge of tears. Her voice is super shaky. And she was like, you know, it's really not okay what you said to me. And I'm like, I didn't say anything to you. I was playing a character. Like none of that was directed at you. And she was like, well, I would never say something like that. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. You don't have to. Like, you know, it's an improv class. You don't have to say stuff like that, but I'm going to say stuff like that whenever it occurs to me, because I say whatever I want. And she's like, slurs like that are dangerous. People are getting hurt. And I was just like, I totally respect your opinion. It's improv class. Like, I'm going to say whatever I want. And she was like, well, as a queer person, you know, that's really not okay. And by the way, she's the girlfriend of the male teacher. And this is one thing that I've noticed here, because I do my best to, and I'm open to everyone, but I don't really roll in circles where there's a lot of this kind of language policing. And the only other time it came up, and now that I'm thinking about it, it also came up after improv class when I was hanging out from someone in improv at a bar. And it was another woman who was married to a man who was claiming to be queer. So the only two instances I've had are with people who are in totally heteronormative relationships, but have to create these problems while claiming to be queer. And she was like, well, I would never say the N-word. And I'm like, that's cool. You don't have to say the N-word. Like,
You're like, but I might.
and I'm like, that's great. Like, you don't have to say anything you don't want to say. When I'm in improv class or not, I'm going to say whatever I want to say. And I respect that this is hard for you to communicate. And if this comes up again, like, I welcome you to talk to me about whatever you want to talk to me about, but know that I'm always going to say whatever I want. And then she went storming away to like go talk to the teachers. So that happened. But what was really notable to me, and this was why I texted you afterwards, was the amount of mind control moving through her nervous system and how completely not in control of herself she was. Like, she was totally out of control in the way that like a child would be who was throwing a tantrum and could, like, she had no tools to control herself. And I could see, I'm like, oh, this is super dangerous, because she's been programmed in a really dangerous way.
So a couple of things. So I also, and you being the language person, it's a good person to talk about with. I've also never really understood the queer moniker. I don't, like, does that just mean you're weird? Like, right? Like, then just say you're weird. Or
it's
does
like, I'm straight, but I'm kind of ashamed of it because of my programming. So I'm going to call myself queer to be interesting.
I would say that I would agree with you, except for that people were calling themselves that before that stuff became a thing, in terms of like feeling guilty that you're not.
Okay.
Like, so the best that I can come up with is that it's like, you know how you have like the way you described her with her magenta hair and her big glasses, like these are people who are like unusual looking. So they adopt a style that some people would associate with someone who is gay.
I'm going to say something super un-PC.
Perfect.
I think they're plain looking.
Okay. Right. But what I'm
large, there are always exceptions, but it's right. Like a plain / homely-ish person. Right.
Who will adopt this look that tends to like that, maybe like the, you know, like a gay guy or a lesbian or whatever, like the stereotype thing, because it's like, well, rather than be plain, not only do I get to be thought of as weird, but weird for not being that weird, but being another way, like it's like a double, like, I don't know. So that, or like the other thing I thought was, because Margaret Cho refers to herself as queer, but she has also reported that she has had a few occasional things with women in terms of like making out with them at bars or like a one night stand. So I always thought, well, maybe it's someone who like isn't opposed to that, but it's not their main thing, nor would they call themselves a bisexual, because like when you say bisexual, it sort of implies like closer to 50-50 or even shot or whatever.
Well, also, Margaret Cho was also like, she was a self-identified fag hag. So is it also someone who's just like really involved in the gay community?
Gay culture. Yeah. So that would be, so one of those three things. So that's just, but the way that she did that is interesting. But I think, okay, so I had a similar situation with someone who was very close to me. I'm not going to say who, because they're pretty close to me. Okay. And not as young as that person, but younger than you or I.
Yeah.
You're in a really super nice restaurant, like super nice, like more than $200 for two people, right? Super nice restaurant. I was treating, right? Hadn't seen this person in a long time and whatnot, right? And somehow over the course of the conversation, like the conversation about whether or not everyone is racist, like came up, right? And I said, you know, I've lived all over the place, and including places where like, you know, the stereotype would say that there would be a lot of racist people, like West Virginia, like Texas, whatever. And like, I haven't really met very many. I've met like one or two people that I'd be like, yeah, that's probably a racist person. I was like, but what I do meet a lot of is people who grew up in cultures where it was kind of homogenized. They're from a small town. They went to church a lot. And so they just don't have experience with people who are a lot different from them. So they're awkward in the beginning, but generally once you get to know them, most of them are pretty decent people. And it's a mistake to call those people racist who aren't, because you're not giving, like, it's better to invite them to get to know you and become, good with people who are different than them. And this person just lost, like, that you like just, in the nice restaurant I'm treating, just could not believe my white privilege and all of this kind of stuff, right? Like all of these.
So it wasn't like a specific like word or slur. It was just your point of view.
It was my point of view. It was my point of view that, like, there was
people are good.
This was a couple of years back, so I don't remember all the exact details, but I think it was something like a lot of the people that she, like when we get into like the political realm or whatever, these people are all racists. No, they're actually not, but most of them do come from lives where they haven't been exposed to people who are a lot different than them. So sometimes when they say things that you perceive as that, what it really is like they're awkward around, right? They're awkward or whatnot. And once they are not anymore, once they've been around people who are different than them, like they're not showing any of those signs of things we would call racism, right?
Right.
And just lost her mind, right? And I'm very
that's even weirder.
I'm very used to people losing their mind about things that I say, right? This has been going on for almost 20 years now. Well, even since I was little, even like before there was like any awareness of conspiracy or anything like that, like I came from a much more progressive family with a lot less rules than the people you and I were around when we were younger. I think it may have been similar for you as well. And sometimes I would say or express an idea that was completely unkosher at their deli, and I would get this shocked, whatever. So my whole life that's been happening. But this hyperventilating, like you're the kid in Toys R Us whose mom just said you couldn't have the toy, right? And you hyperventilate till you like fall asleep and then, kind of thing. Like that is a newer thing. Like I haven't seen that. That is new. And that was like one of the first, like, so maybe some things like that used to happen, but I used to be a lot more hysterical in my presentation of my ideas because, like, when you wake up and you're like, realize all these things are going on in the world, it's like, it feels important to you. And at a certain point, I became like better able to present my case at a normal level. And then that's when the hysteria started. It's like, it's almost like because you weren't getting hysterical and because I wasn't getting hysterical, that triggered them even more and made them like more hysterical.
Yeah, that's interesting that you said that because, I mean, she was visibly shaken as soon as it came out of my mouth. And to be clear, I was playing a character and the character said ballet is faggy. So like, even in the grand scale, like there was no personal insult to any people on any level. But so she was pretty out of her body when we started talking, but yeah, I could see how when I like wasn't pulling back and I wasn't apologizing, it
that's what happened.
Escalated. And the other thing she kept saying was like, no, you don't understand. People are getting hurt. No, you don't understand. And I'm like, I've been on the planet like way longer than you have. Like, I totally understand that we have different mind control. I didn't say any of this. Like, you don't understand. People are getting hurt. And it was like, someone's getting hurt because in improv class, my character called something faggy.
Hard pressed to find a single ballerina on the planet who didn't think ballet was faggy.
And also the fact that like, I have a lot of gay friends who will say themselves, there's a difference between being gay and being a fag.
Right.
Like people who just aren't super delicate and programmed, like we understand what that means. But the other thing that I think is so crucial to this was the fucking narcissism, right? Like the narcissism of like, well, as a queer person, like so fucking what that you identify as queer, even though I know you're sucking dick right now, like not everything has to do with you, and like dealing like these are literally like retarded children. And I'm waiting to see like what the pushback is going to be when I go back to class next week, because I don't want to waste class time. I don't want it to be a thing, but I'm waiting to see if the teacher makes some sort of announcement about it. But the expectation, like imagine that we're in class, right? and there's like a retarded kid in class who can't keep their shit together and is freaking out, to expect the whole class to shift
Right.
to meet the level of the lowest common
But
denominator.
that's exactly it. That was what the whole lockdown was about. We all have to stay home because grandma might get sick.
Right.
Right. It's the same thing. So, okay. So there's a couple of things with this. So I think you said that you watched my show with John Brisson.
Yes.
And I was very serious when I said, he's the only person that I know that goes as a Christian or as a conservative that I don't find it offensive, because he never uses that as an excuse for like the inability to explain how they really feel about something or some stupid political position or whatever. It's that same kind of thing. Whenever somebody says, as a blah, 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 I know what's coming, which is like a whole bunch of nonsense that they're like declaring their immunity from any repercussions of next.
Totally. It was like a couple of years ago when that script of mine got rejected, and the editor goes, well, my producer is a POC. And I'm like, I don't give a fuck. Like, so what? That doesn't change objective reality that I can write in dialect and not be racist. Like, the narcissism of this op is so annoying to me.
Yeah.
Like that the world revolves around the most contracted consciousnesses and their total lack of tools or self-control. It's so freaking ass backwards.
Yeah, this gets into like the Jonathan Haidt stuff pretty well. Like I just watched a newer interview with him and Greg Lukianoff and this other girl who they're working with now on some sort of updated stuff about this from their prior book about the coddling of the American mind. Do you have a shirt? I feel like you have a shirt that says, I say what I want, my words are free.
Yes.
I think you should gift it to her next week at class. I think you should bring it and you should give it to her.
I'm looking at this because this is what I noticed. So my therapist is inviting me to come into a different relationship with being a highly sensitive person, right? Which is something that I don't really identify too hardcore with. But I noticed the largesse of her reaction was a lot for my nervous system, right? And I was noticing like how I could have easily lost my center. So I don't want to make this a cuckoo thing. Like, I want to let the crazy person be the crazy person, and I don't want to poke at her.
I'm not saying that from a poking place. I'm saying that from like, this is like a central portion of who you are, and it's something you've been working on for a long time. So it wasn't situational to her.
Maybe I'll print out a card. Maybe I'll make that, because I love that shirt too much to give it to some strange asshole who doesn't even like me. But I can make it into a card and give her the card.
You just say like, like, look, this is what I do for a living. Like, I'm a language coach and I'm a free speech absolutist. And I'm always going to say what I think. And I encourage you to too. Like, almost say like that, almost reframe it as that was a really positive interaction because you got to say what's true for you and I got to say what's true for me. And instead of looking at that as like a skirmish or something that was bad that happened, it was great because everybody got to say what's true for them. Welcome to America, what it's supposed to be. That's it, right? So almost like a shifting of that dynamic for her, changing a different perspective on what that situation was.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly the right framing of it, because I was, even though she was freaking out and it was annoying, like I was happy that she was engaging a conversation with me. And I was like, cool, I totally hear you. I'm never going to behave differently, but I hear you.
Yeah. So I think that and I think it's one of those things like, and I've told this story before, so I'm not going to go deep into it, but like someone who's one of my best friends in the world, who I trust more than most people right now, like the first day that I ever met her, she was training me at a job I was doing back then. Like, she said something to me that felt very hurtful and hard at that time, but was actually true. And in the end, it made me come to really trust her. She's not going to just butter me up and tell me what I want to hear or tell me how great I am or whatever. She's going to say the truth, which is like, you're really fucking smart, but goddamn, you're annoying, which it's the truth. Right. And so, and that is better for me. That is a healthier person to depend on than someone who's just like, everything you do is great, Emily. Yeah. Like it just is.
I think the X factor here is the level of this mind control and how it co-ops people. And I'm not sure like how much access she has to critical thinking, to self-reflection, to taking responsibility. We'll see how it goes next week. But what I realize in the largesse of her freakout is like, I'm not talking to a person, I'm talking to programming in a body.
So I think that if it was a serious problem, you probably would have heard from someone already. You probably would have gotten an email or a phone call or something like that. My guess is that like the theater crowd, at least while in improv in particular, right? Like that there's probably like, you know, when you go to the bowling alley and the little kids are doing it and they have those bumpers so that it doesn't go in the alley. I think there's some padding in the improv world that doesn't exist, even in the comedy, regular comedy or regular acting world, right? But I just, yeah, I think I feel like you would have heard about it through email, kind of like you did from your whatever class you were taking online, where like you didn't want to say something that they wanted you to say.
The pronoun indoctrination.
Or whatever it was, yeah. So I think there would have been something already if it was a really big deal.
I think so. I mean, of course it's hilarious that like anywhere I go, like I'm going to trigger someone at some point. Like it was so funny that it was my thing. I think it works in my favor that this is the 4th class I've taken. I've always been well behaved. I haven't had an issue, and I'm praying that they will defer to logic, but also keep in mind, this is the same school that kicked me out last year because of the, you know, temporary medical intervention conversation. So we'll see if they make some like dumb, you know, cultural sensitivity announcement before class. I'll keep you posted.
It's good either way, right? If it doesn't happen, then yay for free speech. If it does happen, then yay, you're moving to Texas. So
Right.
it's a win-win for you, right? Okay. So the other thing I wanted to say on this same topic, and I've been like, I was thought about playing a piece of recording, but like it's spread out over a long piece in a way that's hard to clip it for what we're talking about. But the Gymnastics podcast, which I've, you know, talked about many times, the day that Roe got overturned, they did a usually like their patron content is called behind the scenes. So it's not what's on their public podcast forum, but they decided to make this one public because it was so important. So this came out the day of the overturning, and the podcast was called The United States of Handmaids. And the host was crying and hyperventilating and explaining how big of a problem this was going to be for gymnasts and for gymnastics, and all. It was the weirdest.
Gymnasts don't have sex. Gymnasts don't have time for relationships. Well, like, gymnasts don't have periods.
Well, this was like, so at first I couldn't, like, when I first saw this come up in my feed, I was like, oh my, but there's been more and more articles like this about things that just don't even make any logical sense on any planet. Forget SJW shit or whatever. So that was what you just said was my first, like, what the fuck are you talking about? What does this have anything to do with gymnastics? And then, you know, as I listened to her sort of detail it and go through it and whatever, it was like, okay, like, so my thoughts were the same as you at first, right? That like most gymnasts don't have sex at all. Most gymnasts don't have sex till they're done with their career. And the gymnasts
don't get periods until they're done with their career.
Right. I mean, there's been some shifting since you left the gymnastics world based on certain, there are a variety of things, and gymnastics careers are going a lot longer. There's a lot of people competing into their 30s, and Oksana Chusovitina is still going strong at the same age as me. Right. So yes, there are gymnasts that have sex, but there's a couple of things. Like gymnasts in general are highly responsible people. They're straight A students.
They're so type A.
Right. They're so the likelihood that one of them would get themselves in that situation is small. Right.
I also wonder, even if gymnasts are, you know, they're in the sport longer and they are getting periods, the odds of them being fertile, I think, still remain very, very small with the low body fat and the amount of exercise. Like, it doesn't necessarily translate to a lot of fertility.
So I've come to understand that entirety of the gymnastics world is a little different than what you and I were exposed to.
Okay.
So I was always under the impression that gymnasts didn't have sex until they were in their mid-20s, because that's how most of the people that we knew and the people we saw on TV were, for the most part. What I've come to understand, and like, I know for myself, when I was younger, I always felt like, wow, the gymnastics people are really fucking conservative. Like, they're very Christian, they're very conservative, or they're very like, they just, yeah, they're like, I was always like from the most liberal or the most progressive family at the gym, or I was like the most wild one, right? So everyone seemed much more conservative than me. And I thought that gymnastics attracted, I thought that's just like, that was the standard for gymnastics. What I've come to understand is it's a lot different in smaller towns than it is in big cities.
Oh, right. Small town living is just different in general.
All the girls that I met in college, like, they all had boyfriends when they were 13 or 14 and were having, so different groups of people. Like, in the big city, there's so many other things to do. So people who are more progressive, they'll get into theater or music or some other, there's tons of, every option is available in a big city.
Yeah.
In small towns, there's less options. And then there's also, if it's a place where it's cold, like, there's more different kinds of people in gymnastics in small towns than there are in big towns. And also in those towns, there's also less to do when you're not at the gym. So people start having boyfriends and having sex younger because there's just less distractions. Almost everybody that you and I went to gym with either played another sport in their 7 minutes of free time, or were actors or ice skaters or musicians or doing the Mousercise or whatever the fuck, right? We were all just completely involved in one industry or another. In addition to that, it's just totally different, right? And so that there's that. But for the most part, like, it's not a significant problem. It's very rare. Like, I knew one person the entire time I was in gymnastics who became pregnant while she was in gymnastics, and she was older than 20 at the time, and she finished the season and then just quit gymnastics and had the baby, and that's what she wanted to do. And there was no problem about it. She was concerned about the coach finding out, but there was no like, oh my God, I need an abortion. But it was pretty normal the way it happened. It was like pretty adult the way she handled it, right? So, but what this has gotten into now is like, she's any person who's involved in any way with like a college gymnastics team as a coach or in the administrative stuff, or anyone who works for USAG, if they don't come out pro-abortion, then they're somehow anti like freedom for girls. Like, she has just lost her mind with this shit. I'm going to link to it in the description below so people can go listen. When like the way she was like, it's like having trouble composing herself, and like the thing, like the threads she was pulling on and the lines she was drawing, I was like, do we live in the same planet? Like, look, what are you even talking about? Right? Like, I just don't. It's so out of their body, so disconnected from reality, but also so disempowering in that, like, this, and I never thought about it before, right? But this idea that, like, in order for abortion to be available, it has to be government sanctioned, is like the most disempowering thing ever. People have been ending pregnancies since before the idea of government ever came along.
Since women have been having sex, women have been ending pregnancies.
And insisting that we must have government approval for it creates another iteration. It's the same. It's no different than this, like, we need to have like clinics to do ketamine in, or doctor assisted psychedelics or whatever. It's like, it's actually disempowering to women. It's like, I need a person in a white coat to tell me I can have an abortion. Like, the whole, yeah.
I agree. I did a video about this maybe like 3 or 4 weeks ago. And I came to the point, because I don't know if you saw, but I did an interview with a common law constitutional expert to break down what really happened with Roe, because the way the news is talking about it is not accurate. But I was thinking about it and I was like, good. I don't want that in my federal constitution. I don't want them talking about my body at all in the I don't think it should be a state thing either, but I came to the place of like, it's no one's fucking business.
No one's
And
business.
on the languaging front, I wish that someone would do a supercut of how many times any politician or talking head has said, women are going to die, women are going to die, women are going to die. They are forcing this idea so hardcore. And I'm like, what's your next murder all the women plan going to be that you're going to hide in the guise of not having access to?
Right. Just like they're covering up monkeypox, that they're covering up the injuries with monkeypox. Yeah, gotcha.
Totally. They keep saying that. And it's like that programming. And I mean, the woman who I was talking to freaked out at improv class, your friend who freaked out about, I'm guessing Republicans are racist. And then this podcaster, like, it's just so clear that it's mind control when they're that out of their body, when they're that out of control. Like, the level of the transgression or whatever offended them doesn't match up to the largesse of their response.
Well, and the other thing is, like, I recognize that behavior has been effective up to a point, because for a while it was so shocking that people just like caved in because they wanted it to stop.
Right.
But all the people who are going to be influenced by that tactic have been, and the ones who haven't been yet are not going to be.
Right.
So particularly in the case of this podcaster, right? Or but I don't know what the profession or the politics of your friend in the class or whatever is. If you want people to go, oh, you know what, your point is sensible, right? Like, maybe I should consider what you're saying. That behavior makes you seem unhinged. And like, if you were able to present yourself in a calm, rational manner, then you might influence somebody who was like, you know what, I don't really think you're 100% right about this, but I don't want a vaccine. So if we can ally on this, then I'm willing to sort of get on board with some of your cause. And that is the people who are going to be convinced based on that behavior just because they want it to stop. That's over. All those people are already done.
Yeah.
Right. So this is not going to work anymore. So it's a stupid tactic. And it really just makes you look like the kid in Toys R Us freaking out because they're out of Cabbage Patch dolls.
Totally. But we have to understand there's no rational thought. Like, if you were having a conversation with her as her friend, like, she's not in control. That's the point, is this mind control makes it that people aren't in control of themselves. Right. So like, we could reason till the cows come home. She's still going to freak the fuck out when a character says that ballet is faggy.
And the other thing is, now it's like, it hasn't been said exactly this, but it's implied. Anybody who doesn't come out against the overturning, any high up gymnastics person who doesn't come out either against the ruling or as pro-abortion, then they need to be questioned and looked at.
Silence is violence.
Totally, right? So it's just, Okay, let's move on to the next little bit. I think we were going to talk, we got into this a little bit last time, I think, or maybe the time before. Well, we did mention we talked about David Fuller, and you were talking to me about spiral dynamics in reference to the conversation between David Fuller and Ken Wilber on Rebel Wisdom.
Yeah.
And just for just complete transparency, I know nothing about spiral dynamics.
Yeah.
And so, but I will say that in my Glass Bead Game recording with Michael yesterday, it came up because I intuitively thought maybe I had an understanding of it based on something completely else that we were talking about. And when I went and looked up her sort of visual expression, her graphic, it did fit into exactly what I was talking about. It was completely about something else. And so Laura pulled up this article about Claire Graves' spiral dynamics.
Claire Graves is a dude, just so you know.
Okay. So I couldn't understand from this article if this was an article written by Claire Graves or if it was someone else's assessment of what spiral dynamics was, because it was saying the same thing you said was wrong that they were trying to say about Claire Graves's work, and that people can fall back into. So can you give us the cliff notes on what spiral dynamics is and how your understanding from the direct work of Claire Graves is that this system works?
100%. And I just want to give a little bit of context for the audience of how this came up. So I would say it was like 2 weeks before this Rebel Wisdom dropped. I was texting with Robert Forti and I said, hey, is Ken Wilber in on it? Because Integral feels so fishy to me. And he was like, I don't know, but I get the same feeling. And then I think I mentioned it to you in passing on our last show or before the show. And then this podcast came out with David Fuller interviewing Ken Wilber about Jordan Peterson.
Right. Another one of the things where we don't talk to the person, we just talk about them in lieu of talking to them. Right.
Okay. So Ken Wilber has something called integral theory, which he straight up stole from Claire Graves, who created spiral dynamics. And there's a little, I'm not super clear if Claire Graves named it spiral dynamics or if that came after, but it was a couple iterations later that Ken Wilber picked it up, kind of perved it, and then rebranded it as integral theory, which you can see like the guys who do this conspirituality shit show podcast, they're really into.
So that's the religion for David Fuller and for those guys is integral theory.
Correct.
Can I ask you a question? This is maybe just me being silly or stupid. Is integral based on integrity or integration?
Integration. But
integrate. Okay.
And it's an extremely hyper masculinized, capital M, not in terms of dudes, but in terms of the imbalance between masculine and feminine. It leans so heavy on like intellect and reason,
right,
that it's super wonky. So spiral dynamics is a system that presents how consciousness evolves, and consciousness evolves through the same stages in the same order for every being on the planet. No one does it in a different order. No one skips a level. He color coded the levels to pull it away from hierarchy.
I'll show the graph. We'll put the graph up for people.
Okay. And his idea, which again, Ken Wilber has completely ripped off, is that life evolves to transcend and include each level that came before. So if I'm operating at I don't want to use hierarchy, but say a more developed level of consciousness, I will have integrated every single level of consciousness that came before, and I can speak to and from all the other levels that came before. Whereas someone who's operating at a less developed level of consciousness, they're not going to be able to grok the higher levels, right? Now, the big thing that like the most glaring piece of misinformation and propaganda in this particular interview between Ken Wilber, who showed up wearing a wig and a weirdly low cut shirt for like an older man. But the main piece of propaganda there was they were alleging that Jordan Peterson has regressed and he's devolved a level, as has, according to them, who created Locals?
Dave Rubin.
So they also said that Dave Rubin has also regressed. So Claire Graves makes it extremely clear you cannot regress. Once you've evolved to a certain level of consciousness, that's where you are. You're never going to fall back. So that's one of the primary pieces of misinformation.
Because, and also, isn't it, if you've achieved, if you've advanced a level, you still include the level of below it. So you can have that as part of your range. You can go there again, but once you've attained it, it's kind of like the PhD, right? You can have a PhD and still teach stuff you learned your freshman year in college, even though you know more stuff based on having a PhD, right? It's kind of like that.
Exactly. Okay. And this is the theory that informed the article I wrote in 2012 about gender reassignment surgery, saying how, well, life evolves to transcend and include. If we're cutting off our genitals, we're not including, we're not transcending, we're not bringing that along with us, which seems like a more compassionate, loving way to do it. Just to be clear, I'm all for freedom. If you want to cut off your junk, Godspeed. I love your right to do that. But so what I found particularly interesting about this interview was that I have been talking about Jordan Peterson's levels of consciousness as relates to spiral dynamics since you and I went to see him live way back when. And I've done podcasts about it. And my perspective has been, I actually think that Jordan Peterson is operating at a blue level of consciousness, not really that developed, but I think his intellect is so strong that he's taken it to its outermost limits, and he's been able to tap in to some really high levels of capital T truth from what is a blue level.
So you're saying he's here, he's at authoritarian, but maybe he's at the upper ledge, like on the border of blue and orange, and that he can see green pretty well from that point. So sometimes he talks about that which he is aware of, but isn't quite yet himself. Right. So you have him right here. Like
I have him there because of, and just to be clear, because of his thing about religion and the institution of marriage, and blue level is all about like hierarchical authoritarian structures. And he's really steeped in that. They're claiming that he and Dave Rubin were both at green, but have now regressed, which is, according to Claire Graves' body of work that Ken Wilber has ripped off, is not at all possible.
Claire Graves dead.
He's dead.
Okay, typical. So yeah, okay, so I get it. This is, I was noticing this with, I was listening to a little clip from the Kyle Kulinski show today, right? And he was talking about how he came back from vacation, and apparently Joe Rogan had said something about supporting Ron DeSantis. And that's obviously terrible. But then there was also this. And then he played a clip of Joe Rogan talking to some comedian with the last name Schultz, and explaining how Andrew Schultz, explaining how like what the parts that they liked about Bernie Sanders, right? And so he was like, that's amazing. And I was like, in the comment section, I'm like, that's really cute how the parts you disagree with are terrible and the parts you agree with are awesome. Instead of the fact that they're just all things that he thinks. Right. So it's the same thing. As long as Jordan Peterson and Dave Rubin were sort of serving a purpose that David and Ken felt was important, he was a communitarian. Right. But as soon as he like something changed, either in terms of them or him, and they were no longer, feeling the same thing, then he has regressed.
He's regressed.
Advanced.
Yes.
Instead of like, well, maybe it wasn't even the right assessment in the first place. There's this thing. We advance everybody to a higher place on a podium when we like what they're saying. Right. And so it's very.
This was such straight up propaganda. While you have these up, I also want to point out that so in this system, there's what's called first tier consciousness and second tier consciousness. So the yellow and the turquoise at top are second tier consciousness, which is where we get when we've done a lot of work, done a lot of psychedelics, and we're all of a sudden more we oriented than me oriented, like for the greatest good. So the other thing that they did in this interview is they're trying to rebrand second tier consciousness as communism. And I think that's very important to pay attention to, because they're trying to make it that it's this higher level of consciousness that us plebes aren't at, but that's really going to be communism.
When we get up here, we'll obviously see that like communism is the way to go.
Yes.
Right. Okay. So the other thing that I notice here is there's another version of this that looks like it's been hijacked by what you're talking about, where it's changed a lot of the words to things like postmodern, integral, all that kind of stuff.
So that's Ken Wilber's perversion of it.
That's his, okay. Yeah. So this is becoming more and more clear to me, like what the op is. Like we keep having what we need to have a big wall in someone's house where we can like do the John Nash thing and like connect all the stuff and look real fucking batshit crazy, because there's so many things that the op is. Right. But basically like taking some idea that someone or some group of people had and saying it's something different than what they said it was. Yeah. Right. And creating a certain level of confusion. And especially if the people who are redefining it or rebranding it somehow have a wider reach based on institutions behind them, then by the time anybody figures out that that's what happened, that has become the accepted definition of things. And it's too confusing for everyone else. And then there's these stupid things that, well, this isn't stupid because this is part of the way that the world works, but this would be a rebranding of that as well. Like the 100th monkey, or the like, probably like the same moment someone has an idea for the first time in the United States, there's someone else in Europe having it, because that's just the function, that's how the universe works, right? But they're just going to say that, oh, like what Heather did with you. Oh, how cute, I didn't know you had a podcast, right? Like your podcast was a cute little thing that you had before they had theirs, right? Like, but it's that
we actually talked about in person, but okay.
Right. So it's that kind of thing. And
I think it's specifically relevant because I have talked about spiral dynamics so much in my work. I have written about it. I've proposed that the best way to uplevel the jury system is that when choosing a jury of our peers, it's by using Claire Graves' spiral dynamics to choose peers who are operating at our same level of consciousness. So I find it really interesting in terms of our ongoing chess game with the people involved in this op, that all of a sudden they pick it up, co-opt it, perv it, distort it, and, you know, put it out there.
So wait till you see, I'm excited to see what you think of what I did with it yesterday, because it was completely instinctive and intuitive, right? Like we were taking a look at a graphic that FPV Angel had made, right? To explain the way the machine works and the rainbows and the particles, the angels and all that kind of stuff. And instinctively, I was like, I bet this is kind of like what Danny's talking about, the spiral dynamics. And when I pulled up the spiral dynamic graphic, if you just turned it this way instead of this way, but in the same order, sort of, it was like the same time. I'm like, oh my God, like this is the organizing principle of the universe, actually, in terms of the way energy is created, the way thoughts are generated, the way ideas are right? So hopefully you'll like it. Hopefully you'll like what I did with it. I acknowledge that I don't know anything, but this is just instinctively what I think is happening here, right?
I so love that you're bringing this up, because I know we've been talking about this offline, and as we were prepping for our show today, in my mind, I was like, I really want to talk about this Ken Wilber spiral dynamics thing, and I know that Emily said she doesn't know what it is, so she's probably not going to want to talk about it. So I love that it came up yesterday and you brought it up.
So, okay. So yeah, so that's it. So the like, I think, okay, so there's been this goes to the same thing we were talking about before we got started. Like, this is like the weird thing that's happening with this SFI YouTube channel that, like, right? Like, it is not in my character to be like, oh, like they're doing this because of us or whatever. But everyone who has been paying attention to our work sends me texts and emails being like, dude, they're like talking about the same thing that you talked about in your show yesterday, but they're saying it's something totally different than what you were saying it is, right? And like, and yesterday in the show with Michael, I haven't even put it up yet, right? So it's like our overlords at Zoom, or I don't know, like whatever it is. Like, we were describing an energy system, like the way the mechanics and the physics of of the Earth at least work. And like, we were getting all spiral dynamics-y and Walter Russell-y and FPV Angel-y with it. And then like immediately they're like, no, quantum physics is Albert Einstein or whatever it is, right? And it's just like, okay, like it's almost like, well, think about the way that they're changing the definition of words. They changed the definition of female in the dictionary last week.
They changed girl.
Did you see Janet Yellen change the definition of recession in the middle of an interview on TV the other day?
No.
Right. So it's like that. So it's like kind of like, if the first time a person ever hears the word recession, like, let's just say that like there's a 12-year-old who's just learning about budget and markets and fun, whatever. The first time he ever hears of a recession is that clip from Janet Yellen.
Exactly.
Right. Then it doesn't even matter that for hundreds of years before that, recession meant this other thing. Same with female or male or whatever.
This is why Google definitions needs to be totally banned, because you Google, I don't use Google, but you Google a word and their definition pops up first, and it's bigger and it's a cooler font. And
Right.
it's completely warping these young people's, not everyone's minds.
Well, also a lot of words you can't even find a definition for anymore because there's now a company that has that word as their brand name. And so people, like when you are doing something, like there's all these pop culture uses or slur of slang uses of the same word. So you can't find, we can't see anything. now you're gone. You just disappear.
Select old dictionaries.
There you go. Yeah.
The older, the better.
Yeah. Only buy a dictionary if someone is walking to your door and knocking on the door. Right?
Seriously.
So yeah, so it's this constant, like, whoever defines, whoever gets to the audience first or farthest, like is the one who defines what a thing is. And it's very weird whatever's going on with this layer. Like there's a part of me that is like, I can't even believe they're paying any attention, but like, unless we live in the most coincidental universe ever.
Totally. Yeah.
Right.
Can you give me screen share? Because I want to show you something.
You have it. You should, because you're co-host.
Okay. So while we're still on the topic, before we get too far away. So, Eric, who helps us out with things, he sent us the email about, this was before he knew that you and I were talking about the integral stuff. And he was like, hey, I don't know if you've connected integral, but there's a guy on Consilience project who's on integral. So I just want to show you, because this actually ties into what you were saying when we started the conversation. So this guy's Greg Thomas, and he is on, hang on. So he's on Consilience project, see right here, in Institute for Cultural Evolution. So he's part of this integral studies thing. So I did a little digging on him, this guy, Greg Thomas, but so integral life, right? So this is a Ken Wilber offshoot of this thing, but check this out. So this is his main thing. He's part of the Institute for Cultural Evolution. So as we were talking about earlier about the thing with like Roe versus Wade, whatnot, look at their platform of policy recommendations: abortion rights, big tech governance, homelessness, education, climate change, immigration. Notice how abortion rights is up front.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now check this out. Just because I think this ties into like these people.
Also noticing how their logo looks like a combination of the Gene Keys logo and Sonia Barrett's logo.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, so I haven't seen this before. This is new to me. So this is their board of directors. John Mackey, Jeff Salzo. Okay, notice anything about like, if you, there's just like, what is the one thing that these people on their board have in common?
So they're all CEOs.
They're all white dudes.
They're all white dudes, and they're all from corporations that we like the guys. Everybody knows Whole Foods is like completely gone and corrupted and whatever. But yeah, they are all white dudes. So it's pretty funny that they're telling us but they're white dudes who are going to tell us how racist we are, right?
Look at this diversity statement. The Institute for Cultural Evolution is a nonprofit think tank that represents newly emerging. In keeping with our nonprofit business model, our board of directors is comprised exclusively of our financial supporters. Some are left, some are right. One is gay, and another is a first-generation American. However, despite this diversity of viewpoint and life experience, our board does not yet reflect a diversity of gender or racial identities. We're working on this. I mean, it just when I think it can't sink lower, it just keeps getting lower and lower and lower.
Yeah, it's bad.
Super gross.
Also, it's just, I don't know, like our board of directors are our financial supporters. Like that's a little weird.
The whole thing
you can buy your way onto our board.
I think it's just because, again, going to like, we're talking spiral dynamics. Then you get Ken Wilber, white guy, talking to David Fuller, white guy, who are going to tell us what we're supposed to think it is. Like the whole thing.
I don't even care that people are, it's just hilarious because what they're pushing is so like, I don't know, it's a mess. But yes, that's an interesting and fair point. Okay.
Like I said, I don't like to play the chick card or the Jew card or any of the cards, but I just think it's interesting for this particular op and all these people who are telling us how woke we're supposed to be in climate and abortion and whatnot, that they still remain white dudes. Like it's
right. Like, isn't like, there's not like a disabled Black lesbian out there that's like willing to join you.
Right. Right.
Right. Yeah. All right. I'm sure we've gotten ourselves in trouble with at least 100 people today, but in afterwards, we'll be getting ourselves in trouble with at least 2 more. So we have a fantastic, probably one of the most perfect pieces of propaganda ever to analyze over and afterwards. So if you'd
I've
like
been so looking forward to this. It's taken so much for me to not talk to you about what we're about to dive into.
So if you'd like to join us for afterwards number 63, wordspodcast.locals.com, become a supporter and get to have the fun with us. We'll see you. Go to DannyKatz.com, go to her non-social media pages. You can
Sign up for my newsletter.
Sign up for her newsletter. Find me everywhere. I'm still on some of those other places. Bye.
Bye.
It's cool, Scooby-Doo. So yeah.